So, for this session, the mind game of musical creativity. I know you came here thinking piano creativity. You'll see at the top of the outline, I took the liberty of changing the title. This is part of the piano track, but I know that during the next 3 days here, you're going to get all sorts of courses on how to craft a piano arrangement. I've taught them here before, many times. J.B. Taylor, who's a wonderful new pianist who's just on the scene, well, the last few years, she's teaching on the art of underscoring. I believe that's going to be what one of her sessions might be. There's all sorts of nuts and bolts how to do things, which, conferences like this always feature a lot of that. Not wanting to repeat some of the arranging courses that I've taught in years past, and also kind of wanting to stay clear of some of the nuts and bolts courses, I thought I would take maybe a little bit of a different path, and I would speak to folks about the subject of creativity, okay? A lot of people, including me, we just find creativity mysterious. It's something that, boy, we need in our field, you need in your field, and yet we're sometimes afraid of it. It's a bit mysterious. So I thought I would just kind of unpack that a little bit. And particularly, this session is really geared toward anyone that might be in this room that might be interested in doing something creative, or writing that piano arrangement, or learning how to underscore a little bit more effectively under a prayer, or being a little bit more creative somehow in your church work, but maybe you're just a little bit afraid to start or not quite sure how to start. I have been privileged to spend really the majority of my career, all of my career really. Before I went into the music industry, I was a teacher, collegiate teacher at a Christian college in Kansas. And even teaching and working with students is creative in how you teach. And so I've spent my entire life getting to be involved in the creative process. So I want to give you some encouragement and some warnings. And if it's a field you haven't quite jumped into yet, I just want to give you the green light to do that. Does that sound good? That's how we'll handle today. It's 4:09. We'll be done in 45 minutes. I'd love to finish up in 45 minutes and give you 5 minutes for questions. I am a college professor from years back, so I love the handout. And here is the first little instance of creativity that you're going to find from me today. I am enamored with this new font that I paid a lot of money for. It's called, well, it's not Courier, Jan. This is Fletcher Typewriter. Okay? You know what, I sometimes just type notes on the computer and send it to people. I feel like I'm a spy, with the typewriter look. It kind of, it makes me think I'm like Raymond Chandler writing The Big Sleep or something. Back in, Raymond Chandler novels? Yeah, okay. I don't know what you mean. No, not at all. So, if you can read my Fletcher typewriter, then we can get started here. First thing I want you to know, if you've not tried to do anything creative, or if you are a little bit stymied in your creative process, or if you feel like you kind of like to be creative, but you're not sure that belongs to you, the realm of creativity, let me tell you right away that it does. Okay, it does. And here's why. Creativity is a spiritual endeavor. It really is. We are almost no more like God than when we are creating. Now, why do I say that? Because God is the ultimate creator, and we are made in His likeness. And that goes beyond assuming if we're made in God's likeness, God must have a nose and 2 ears. It means we have His characteristics. And God is a creator, okay? And the very fact that our Creator is a creator gives us the right to be creative. Unfortunately, and I think this is really more or less a 20th century, 21st century problem, creativity in our culture has kind of been relegated just to a select few. If you're in cinema, if you make movies, if you're an artist, if you're a sculptor, if you're a composer, if you're a writer, a novelist, if you write poems, if you paint, then yes, you're a creator, but if you don't do any of those things, then I'm not a creative person. And I think everyone in this room is ridiculously creative, okay? And I'll prove it to you. Have you ever gone into your living room before after your furniture has been arranged a certain way and thought, I'm tired of this, I'm going to rearrange the furniture? Where do you think that drive to rearrange furniture comes from? It comes from an innate thing inside you of wanting to change a pattern and make it into something different, okay? If you are planning meals for the week, and I think I'm going to place this dish with this dish, and I wonder if this would work with this, and I've never paired this with that, that's your creativity working, okay? My mom, who's no longer with us, I know that Mom would say that she was not creative, but I would argue that my mom was one of the most profoundly creative people I ever knew. She constantly was rearranging furniture. She was rearranging walls. She wore the gaudiest jewelry that you've ever seen in your life. You know, have you ever been to Graceland in Memphis? I mean, I love Elvis, but you know, Graceland is kind of gaudy. I mean, maybe it wasn't back when Elvis decked up Graceland. But you're assaulted by all these colors and all these things that, you know, you just feel like the king of rock and roll bought at the junk shop down the road. Mom's jewelry would put Graceland to shame. I mean, Patty is right. I mean, and she would pair this stuff with all the... And I didn't necessarily agree with her choice of creativity, but the way she would mix and match things, I could tell there's creativity there. You get it, right? We're all creative, right? And you have a right to be creative, and not only do you have a right to be creative, but you really are acting in the image of your Creator and bringing honor and glory to Him and becoming like Him, right? As Christians, we are all trying our best to become like Christ, grow in Christ-likeness. And I submit to you that if you have a desire to sit and learn how to craft a piano arrangement, that desire is very God-honoring, and you need to pursue that. Okay, you get it. Begin it now. If you go down my list, I don't like to read a lot of quotes when I'm standing in front of folks. I heard one time years ago that every time you look down to read, you lose people's attention. And that is true. I mean, if we hear a speaker, we don't want him to be doing this. We want him to be, you know, looking at us. But I'm going to beg your forgiveness. I am going to read this quick quote by W.H. Murray. It's called Begin It Now. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans. That the moment one definitely commits oneself, insert when you just decide to jump into the deep end and do something. The moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. All sorts of things occur to help one that would not have otherwise occurred. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents and meetings and material assistance which no man would have dreamed would have come his way. I have learned that deep respect for one of Goethe's couplets, whatever you can do, or whatever you even dream you can do, begin it. Just start it. Boldness has genius, magic, and power in it. Begin it now. I think that I wish I could just have that quote up there on my wall. Right? If we have this itch to do something creative, just begin it. But the problem is we don't. And why don't we? And I want to go through a quick list of 5, 6 things and kind of unpack each one of these. The first thing that I think, that causes people to not begin to live a little bit more of a creative life is simply procrastination. Now, why are we procrastinating? That's where we have to go. Are we procrastinating because we're lazy? I really don't think so. I don't think any of us are lazy. I think we all understand that, you know, to attain things that are worthwhile, to create something, we have to put a little elbow grease in. I don't think any of us are afraid of work. I'm not. So there's got to be a deeper reason why we procrastinate. I think possibly one of the reasons is that we're afraid of goofing something up. We're afraid of a mistake. We're afraid of failure. I really want to learn how to play Amazing Grace out of the hymn book with something other than the hymn book chords. I need to spend some time at the piano and really learn how to do that. But I don't want to, because what if after all is said and done, I realize I can't? Or what if I try to create a piano arrangement and my worst fear comes true, I made a mistake and it sounds awful? And so the one surefire way that we can defend ourselves against making any kind of creative mistake is to just choose not to start. And that absolutely guarantees that you won't make a mistake. Unfortunately, it also guarantees you'll never create anything. But you won't make a mistake, right? So I think that's part of the reason why folks are a little bit, why we procrastinate. It's been said, and I love this quote, that we never, ever tell ourselves we're not going to write our symphony. We don't say, I'm not going to write my symphony. It's a pipe dream. I'm never going to do it. We don't say we're not going to write our symphony. We say we are going to write our symphony. We're just going to start it tomorrow. Right? But then what happens tomorrow? We are going to write that symphony. We're going to just start it tomorrow. Right? And when does tomorrow ever come? A lot of times folks will procrastinate because maybe they're just not feeling inspired. I have to tell you, I feel inspired when I'm at a Whataburger. I think if I waited until I was inspired to go to my desk and write something, I might be waiting forever. One of the, Dan Forrest, I love Dan Forrest, I love his music, and this is Dan Forrest, not Brad Nix. I mean, I've sold a few anthems, but Dan Forrest, right? Dan Forrest made a comment to me one time, which I'll never forget. He said, Brad, I have never looked out at the ocean or a beautiful mountain range and heard a melody. And hear what I'm saying. I've never looked out at the ocean or this romantic, I'm in the Swiss Alps and all of a sudden music is in my brain. I've never looked at a sweeping, beautiful vista and heard a melody. What he's saying is he has to work for it. And it is a truism of creativity that the inspiration usually comes, almost always comes, once the work has started and not before the work. Okay? It's almost like, I think an artist, when an artist finally decides to work, it's when the pain and despair of not working finally is greater than the pain and despair of working. And either that or a deadline, and then that'll get someone working. But don't wait for inspiration. That's a romantic notion. Okay, you're going to find your inspiration once you get in there and you get started in the work. Okay, it just always happens that way. And a lot of times, we have these romantic notions that we see from movies and, Amadeus. We've all seen that film, and he's sitting there, and maybe Mozart was this way because he was Mozart, but he's sitting there shifting the pool ball around the pool table, and he's just dictating music that's happening in his head faster than he can write it down. Maybe Mozart, I guess, was that way. Mozart's come around once every 300, 400, 500 years. In fact, Mozart died, I think, in 1756. We haven't seen another one. Most of us aren't Mozart. So this idea of waiting to be inspired, it's all romantic. You can't wait on it. A lot of times folks are a little bit iffy of criticism. I get that. More often than not, though, the people that are going to criticize you are the ones who wish they were kind of doing what you're doing. Stepping out and doing something creative and, putting their feelings on the line. You just kind of have to learn to be a little bit thick-skinned with things like that. Self-doubt. Self-doubt actually can be a really, really good thing. We don't think of self-doubt as being a motivator for good work, but it really can be. What self-doubt means is that you care about what you're doing. right? All that means is that you care about what you're doing. I have self-doubt when I'm about to craft an anthem or write a piano book or write a lyric, because I have in my mind what I think and what I wish and what I hope the finished product is, and I'm afraid that the end result of what I create, I have doubts that I'm going to be able to match my creation with what my intended goal is. Well, all that means is I just care about what my intended goal is. If I didn't care about it, I would just put any old slop out there, right, and call it a day and go home. So self-doubt can be a very good thing as long as it doesn't cause you to become incapacitated where you do nothing at all. Right? You get that. You understand what I'm saying? Isolation. It is also true that most creative work is done in isolation. And a lot of people just can't handle that. And that's, believe it or not, a reason why we procrastinate, why we don't get our work done. I don't want to pick on him. He's not here, but I'm just going to tell you this. The one guy that I have met in my entire life that has no trouble being creative in the middle of everyone around him is Joseph Martin. For 8 years, I worked in his office, and I would be sitting there. Joan Curbo, his assistant, would be there. The phone is ringing. His kids are coming up and downstairs. Sue, his wife, is coming in and out. There's someone out there working on the pool. And all the while, he's sitting there writing an anthem. And it turns out to be a really good anthem when he's done. And actually, if you get to know Joe a little bit, most of us know him really well, he's different for folks because he really dislikes being alone. He's a people person. You'd never guess that, would you? He's a people person. When I write, you know what my favorite time to write is? I'm on staff at a church, and my office is at the church. The church staff is gone on Fridays. I go up into that building by myself. I go to the center of the building, which is where the choir room is. It'd be a great tornado shelter. It's right in the center of the building. I lock the choir room door, I lock my office door, and then I install something that is a retina scan before you can get in. Because when I'm doing my creative work, I don't want anyone. But I'm also a guy that doesn't mind being alone. I enjoy that. I really do. And some people are geared that way, others aren't. But if you are geared to where you don't like spending the lonely hours of creating, that's something you got to come to terms with. Fear kind of plays into self-doubt. We've already talked about fear. We don't start things because we're afraid that we might not be good at it, or we might not, the intended result might not be what we wanted it to be. A guy named Stephen Pressfield, who wrote a really good book. I'm hesitant to recommend it here because it's not a Christian book. But it does include some nice stuff in it. He wrote a book called The War of Art. And it's a play on the art of war, right? And he writes in there, and I've got this quote, that the more scared we are, now listen to that, the more scared we are of a work or a calling, the more sure we can be that we have to do it, that it's something we need to do. And I think that's pretty good advice for all of life. You feel like you're scared to death, but you feel like in your town you need to start a food pantry, but you just don't quite know how to do it. You need to, start a shelter for battered children, or any kind of nonprofit, and we don't know what to do, but it's eating at you that you should, but you're scared to death. That's a pretty good indication maybe you're on the right path with whatever calling you need to be doing. Now, anything can be taken to extremes. I can tell you right now that I'm scared to death of jumping out of an airplane. That doesn't mean that I think God's calling me to jump out of an airplane, right? But you get what I'm saying, that when you think of something that you've got an urge to do, and you think maybe I could do it, but I'm just not quite sure, and I'm just too afraid to start, maybe that's something that might be something you need to do. Imposter syndrome. If you ask me right now, Brad, are you a composer? On my better days, I might be able to tell you, yeah, I'm a composer. We all feel like phonies. At least I do. I hate to be down like that, but the old saying, fake it till you make it. I think that's kind of how so many of us feel. And even folks that are very well established in their field, this idea, I keep waiting for the day that I'm going to walk into my office and fire up the computer and look at my, blank page of manuscript and start putting notes on the page and feel like I am complete master of this. This is my kingdom, music, composition. I'm in control of all my materials. I'm just going to wield this into something beautiful out of sheer cleverness and I've never gotten Lloyd, have you? Sean? I've never gotten there. I always feel a little bit like an imposter. And, when you read biographies and you see interviews of creative people that we admire, in their moments of honesty, which may or may not be all that often, depending on who it is you're listening to, most folks who are involved in creativity say the same thing. So if you're interested in, becoming someone that, arranges a song for your church choir, but you feel like an imposter trying to be a composer, well, join the club. It's not ever going to feel any different. If you want to write something, but you don't feel like a writer, at least in my experience, that's never going to change. It's just this imposter syndrome of someone that's always going to have a seat at your creative table, and you just have to be willing to welcome that entity as a guest. It doesn't have to be a wanted guest, but it's always going to be a guest. I've learned through the years just to kind of acknowledge it when I walk in, maybe wave to it, and then power up the computer and get started anyway. All right, so we've gotten through a few of these reasons why we might not get started with our work. Goethe has told us that it's best, if we think we can do something, to go ahead and begin it. We've unpacked a whole lot, although not all, of the reasons why we might not start something. So now then we've got it moving. So what do we do? Well, that's my Roman numeral 2. Once you start, for goodness sake, don't stop. Okay? Think like a professional. All right? Why is it that we approach creativity on anything or any kind of creative thing that you do? If you like to watercolor, right? If you like to improvise at the piano, why do you like to write poems? Why is it that we treat that unprofessionally? There's a saying that I have railed against my whole life. I have railed against it my whole life. By the way, I've railed against it my whole life. And some of you might have said this to people, or you might have been told this, so I don't mean any disrespect with this. But I have had folks all the time come up and say, when they find out I'm a professional musician, they'll say, oh, that's wonderful that you're a professional musician. I'm an amateur. I just do it because I love it. and there's nothing that makes this old boy madder than that. Because what I want to say is, no, you actually don't love it enough. That's why you're not doing it professionally, or you're just not good enough to do it professionally. That's what I want to say. The fact of the matter is, I love music so much, I've given my life to it. It's what I want to do every day, right? I don't treat it like an amateur, right? An amateur means I love it, I'll do it when I feel like it. Today, maybe not, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll wait till I feel inspired. No, I want to be at the desk every day. Every day. And, well, yeah, Brad, that's your career. Yes, that's right, it's my career. But we all know here at the Alleluia Conference, we're choir folks. We all know that choirs aren't what they have been. And do you know in 15, 20 years from now, if there are no more church choirs in this country, I hope that I'm still showing up at my desk every day to write choir. Because I just love it. I just love it that much. And so you may not be a professional musician or whatever endeavor your creativity leads you in, but treat it like one. It's something sacred. We've already established that, right? Set up a time that you're going to write and show up to the desk. Set up a time that you're going to paint and show up to the desk and do it. Everyone's busy, and I get that, but humans have an incredible capacity to figure out how to do something when they really want to do it. It is true, right? So you have to think like a professional, okay? My wife is, I believe, she's one of the most gifted teachers in Texas. She's a media specialist, and I'm presenting to you guys here today. She goes all over the state and presents to these big, big conferences. As I always say, her success is kind of off-putting, but I love her anyway. And but she's also a classroom teacher. She's a librarian, and you probably have teachers in here. You go to teach. You don't wait till you feel like teaching before you get yourself out of bed and go and work. It's your job, right? So we have to approach creativity that same way. Okay. I love Madeline L'Engle, and I'll recommend a book of hers in just a minute. I have recommended books from her before. And in her book, Walking on Water, she tells the story of a watchmaker. And if you'll forgive me, I'm going to look down and break my eye contact with you just for a few more minutes. I want to read this. This is kind of an interesting story, and it speaks to the idea of making time every day for your creativity, to practice your creative art. Even on the days where you're feeling not inspired, even on the days where you're just sitting there and, what is it they say, writing is like staring at a blank sheet of paper until blood forms on your forehead. It's easy. It's just like staring at a sheet of paper until you bleed to death. But even if you're having those kind of days, the very act, and we all have those kind of days, the very act of just showing up to do the work, this is the story of the watchmaker. And it's actually a Lewis Carroll story. A small village had only one clockmaker and repairer. When he died, there was no one left in the village who could fix clocks. Soon, all of the clocks and watches began to break down. Clocks became absolutely unreliable. So many of the villagers abandoned their timepieces. That sounds serious. One day, however, a famous clockmaker and repairer passed through the village. All of the folks in the village brought their broken clocks, watches, and timepieces to him. After looking at each one of them, he announced that he could only repair the ones whose owners had kept wound, because they were the only ones that could remember how to keep time once they were repaired. This is Madeline L'Engle. So we must daily keep things wound. That is, we must pray when prayer seems as dry as dust. We must write when we're physically tired, when our hearts are heavy, when our bodies are in pain. We may not always be able to make our clock run correctly, but at least we can keep it wound so that we will not forget. I think that's pretty profound, and that's something that I try to live by every day. I try to do a little something that is kind of creative. Keeping the creative juices flowing. So listen to and serve the work. I have to admit, it sounds a little bit airy-fairy. What do you mean listen to and serve the work? Madeline L'Engle also talks a lot about this. I can't tell you how many times this has happened. I have plotted out a piano arrangement. I just wrote a book of piano arrangements, so my mind is in thinking through where piano arrangements are going to land. I have plotted out my arrangement before I write. This is kind of going to be what the intro is. And maybe I'll go to this key. I'll do the second verse this way. Oh, I'm arranging Amazing Grace, so when I get to the through many toils and trials and tears, I'll put that in minor. That's never been done before. I'm being funny. That's funny. Amazing Grace isn't in there. I'm sorry. I want to be a little sorry. But I plot through, at the work in my hand. But you know, something funny happens. Once I start arranging it, it's almost like the arrangement takes a life of its own. And although I thought I wanted to go here for that second verse, the music, there's something in the music that really somehow inside is calling me here. It just doesn't feel right to go there. I thought it would, but now then that I'm at this crossroads, what it really feels like is to go here. Well, at that point, I can remain master of the work, and I can say no. Before I wrote a note of it, I decided that this was the direction I wanted to go in for the second verse. I'm going to power through and go that way. Or I can kind of put myself out of it and say, I'm going to serve the work. It really wants to go this way, so let's see what happens. That's listening to and serving the work. How many writers have you listened to where they create characters in novels that they're writing, and the characters themselves actually end up surprising the authors with things that they say or situations that they're in? You know, if you've ever done any creative activity for any length of time, you know that what I'm saying is true. When you step out of it, your work really does take on a life of its own. And the more you can allow your work to do that, the more you're going to keep your creative juices flowing. Okay? B, become a child again. So we all know that Christ said, you know, to his disciples, guys, don't stop those children from coming to me. It's like a child that we get into the kingdom of heaven. And we know what Christ means. We know that he's talking about a childlike trust, the ability that a child has to totally place themselves into the care of someone else. We do that with Christ, with his work on the cross. That's what he means. The intellectual, the adult that's hardened and cynical and bitter and can't be vulnerable enough to trust Christ with their lives. Christ warns people not be like that. Well, I would kind of, not to put words in Jesus' mouth, but I would say that we can't really enter the kingdom of creativity until we become at least a little bit childlike. There's something magical about children, right? I mean, we even sing about it at Christmas. Toyland, once you pass its borders, you just can't go back there again, right? There is an openness to magic. There's an openness to fantasy. There's an openness to everything being a great adventure that after we've lived enough of our life's journey, we kind of put those things in a box called childhood, right? And we don't get them out anymore. But as creative people, we need to always be working back to becoming childlike. Not childlike as in immature, but childlike in how we approach wonder and how we approach the things that are unseen, right? I'm the dad of 3 daughters, and they're now getting a little bit older. My youngest is 10, my oldest is a college kid down in San Antonio. But I used to sit and watch them, and I really think some of the best composition lessons I ever received were not in music school or music college, no offense to Baylor, or where I went to school or anything, but it's watching my kids play, right? First off, well, my middle daughter actually might not be like this. She kind of has a hot temper. But I would watch my oldest daughter play with blocks. And you get the blocks, and she builds a little bit, and then what happens? After, sooner or later, the blocks come down. What does she do? She starts again and builds it again. Just play. The end result, which is the blocks just always come tumbling down, doesn't stop her. She just keeps going. Well, you hit a bad writing day. It's just play. You keep going, right? And not just automatically say, I've seen other people. I know what the bar is. I'm not even going to try. Right? Does that make sense? You get what I'm saying? That there is something to becoming a child again that really lends itself to creativity. Once you're a little bit further down the road, you're going to start, when you've made a few things, written a few things, painted a few things, you're going to start thinking about your artistic identity. Don't. This is C on my little outline. You know, I don't know if what's Brad Nix's artistic identity with my choral music? I don't know. I don't care. You know what? If my music is around after I'm gone, someone else can figure that out, right? I don't think anyone probably will, but, care enough to try to figure that out. But we all want to have our voice. We all want to have something unique and different to say. Well, the very fact that your creativity, you're creating something that's coming from you, by its very nature, makes it original. Right? You couldn't, when I first started, I wanted to write like Joe Martin. I love Joe Martin's compositional style. I couldn't write like Joe Martin if I wanted to. I tried and still didn't sound like Joe Martin. He's Joe Martin. I'm not Joe Martin. I'm Brad Nix. He can't write like me. The very idea that I'm concerned about what's my style? Does this sound like Brad Nix? I want to write this, but that creates what I like to call paralysis by analysis. Pretty soon you just can't write anything because you're stuck trying to write in some, imagined style. I don't know. Style happens, I think, without you even knowing it. If you try your best to go to sleep at night, you ain't never going to do it. But if you just relax a little bit, what happens? You fall asleep and all of a sudden you wake up and it's the next morning. If you try to develop a style, it's probably not going to happen. But if you just do your work to the best of your ability, then maybe one day you'll turn around and look at your body of work and you'll say, this is who I am. You get it? Don't be afraid to steal. Oh my gosh. Oh yes. Listen. Can I read Ecclesiastes to you? 1:9-11. History merely repeats itself. It's all been done before. Nothing under the sun is truly new. Sometimes people say, here is something new. But actually, it is old. Nothing is ever truly new. We don't remember what happened in the past, and in future generations, no one's going to remember what we're doing now. Steal. In other words, as Mark Hayes told me once, originality is hiding your sources. Well, if that's good enough for Mark Hayes, it's good enough for Brad Nix, right? Here's another great quote. What is originality? Undetected plagiarism. I love that. It was the great Salvador Dali who said, those who do not imitate anything produce nothing. And then Mark Twain. I love Mark Twain. He says, this sounds like Mark Twain. Not that I knew him personally, but it sounds like something he would write. It is better to take what does not belong to you than to let it lie around neglected. That's pretty good, isn't it? So when I teach my arranging courses, a lot of how I teach them is I use existing arrangements, and some of you have probably been in those classes with me here, as templates, as blueprints that we build a piano arrangement around. We're not plagiarizing, but we are imitating, right? Which leads into our own thing. There's a great book that a guy named Austin Kleon wrote. Austin Kleon he lives in Austin. And it's a tiny little book. You can buy it at Barnes & Noble. You can buy it anywhere. It's called Steal Like an Artist. Okay? This is the last long quote that I'm going to read you, but I do want to read this. In it, he says, first, you have to figure out who to copy. Second, you have to figure out what to copy. Well, who to copy is easy. You copy your heroes, the people you love, the people you're inspired by, the people you want to be. The songwriter Nick Lowe says you start out by rewriting your hero's catalog. And you don't just steal from one of your heroes, you steal from all of them. The writer William Misner said if you copy from just one author, it's plagiarism, but if you copy from many, it's research. I like that. I once heard the cartoonist Gary Cantor say, if you have one person you're influenced by, everyone will say you're the next whoever. But if you rip off 100 people, everyone is going to say, oh, you're so original. Now, what to copy? That's who to copy. What to copy is a little trickier. Don't just steal the style, steal the thinking behind the style. Did you catch that? Don't just steal the style, steal the thinking behind the style. You don't want to look like your heroes. You want to see like your heroes. The reason to copy your heroes and their style is that you might somehow get a glimpse into their minds. That's what you really want, to internalize the way they look at the world. I'll stop there for a minute. I love Andrew Peterson. And I sometimes write some lyrics. And, to be able to see the world through Andrew Peterson's eyes. He's the guy who wrote Is He Worthy? Is He Worthy? He is, right. Well, if you look at some of his lyrics, there's just so many moments that get to me. He's got a song called Just As I Am, and he's talking about how he comes to Christ, and he's afraid that Christ isn't going to love him, and what he's really most afraid of, he says it much more poetically than me, but what he's most afraid of is that Christ's love isn't going to be any better than his. And as humans, we love until we're wrong, and then we turn away. He's afraid Christ's love is going to be, and he does it with so much rhyme and beautiful poetry. I just wish I could see the world through his eyes. And when I look at Andrew Peterson's lyrics, or I look at a Craig Courtney melody, that's what I'm trying to do. How did Craig, I want to see this text that Craig just said. I want to see it through his eyes. I don't want to just copy his notes. That's ripping Craig off. I want to get a little deeper than that. Okay. If you just mimic the surface of somebody's work without ever understanding where they are coming from, your work will never be anything more than a knockoff. At some point, you have to move from imitating your heroes to emulating them. Imitation is about copying. Emulation is when imitation goes one step further, breaking you through into your own thing. It's kind of a known idea that Johnny Carson wanted to be Jack Benny. You remember Jack Benny, anyone? I do. Mom and Dad watched Jack Benny. But Johnny Carson didn't end up being Jack Benny. He tried to, but he fell short. But along the way of falling short, trying to be Jack Benny, somehow or another, he became Johnny Carson. And then a little bit later, a guy named David Letterman tried his best to become Johnny Carson. And along the way, he found out who David Letterman is. And then a little bit later, Conan O'Brien mentions that David Letterman's my hero. I'm going to be the next David Letterman. Well, he's not. But it's imitating and copying our heroes and failing where we find out where our own thing lies. Okay? All right. Dedicate yourself to mastering technique, whatever it is you want to do. Be a continual student at it. My wife is here; she can tell you. I go to bed every night. Most of the time, I'm reading a music composition for dummies. I don't know. I'm always studying. Always have been. I taught for years, not years, but for 8 years in college, and I felt like probably the greatest lesson I could ever give my kids is that when I was practicing or writing, I would always do it at the school, because I wanted them to see that I'm always working, right? Always master your craft. And coming here to a place like Alleluia shows that that's important to you, right? So you're doing that. A lot of people like to keep several projects going at once. Again, this is under the subheading of keeping your creative juices going. I'm not like that. I throw that in there because it's common wisdom. A lot of people just do better when they can, I'll work on this for a little bit, then I'll go over here and I'll do this. I'm trying to rearrange this room. I'm not quite sure where I want the TV to be yet, so I'll go over here and rearrange the dining room and then come back to this. To me, that overwhelms me. I'm kind of myopic. I just stay with one thing until it's done. I'm medicated because of that, because it can really kind of be a problem if I'm not careful. It's a type of hyper-focus. And it works out pretty well for editing. It really is no big deal if I'm editing or writing that I can spend 4 or 5 hours working on 3 measures and not ever feel tired or ready to go. But a lot of people aren't quite like that, and so it helps to keep several projects going at once. Surround yourself with great art. Never before in the history of, I think, the world, have we had art more readily available. If you live in the middle of, Bastrop, Texas, like we have some really nice art museums from the Austin art community, but you can go online, right, and you can look at the Mona Lisa on your phone, right? I read great books, read great literature, look at great cinema. All of those things are so important to the growth of and keeping your own creative juices going. Garbage in, garbage out. So you want to make sure that what you put in is really, really good. I'm reminded of Paul when he says, think on these things. Think on things that are noble, that are pure, that are good. That's what you meditate on. And I think as artists, if we want to produce lasting art that's good, we have to meditate on those kind of things too. Engage yourself in other types of creative or non-creative work. You know what? I'm so proud of myself. I really am. I will just tell you I'm proud of myself. I mentioned it a minute ago. About a year and a half ago, I decided that I wanted to start writing lyrics. I never thought of myself as a lyric guy. Kind of like what I was saying earlier. I kind of wanted to, but I just kind of put myself into a box of, I don't think I can. Really what it is I was afraid that if I started trying to write a lyric and I couldn't do it, then I'd have to come face to face with the fear, which is, I tried something and I couldn't do it. So it was safer to just not start. Right. But you know what? I've written a few and they're not half bad. I'm not going to tell you they're the best things that have ever been published, but I'm reasonably certain they're not the worst. And you know, opening up that avenue, what has been interesting for me is it's informed the way that I write and craft melodies as a composer, which is what I've always done. And it's amazing to step back and kind of see how the two feed into one another. And I can see my creative juices kind of growing and being rekindled writing melodies because of the work that I'm doing writing lyrics. And so I wish I would have, started it sooner, but, my gosh, I'm 30 this year. I guess I didn't wait that long. I'm going to be 50. I'm not 30. Y'all could at least give me a courtesy laugh. Make me feel better. I mean, boy, it's a tough group. You should have warned me. I can't tell you how many times when I'm trying to keep my creative juices going, I can't tell you how many times actually answers present themselves when I'm doing something non-creative. Some of my best solutions to problems that I would have never thought I could solve come actually when I'm out on the job. It's just, there's something about doing something else that your brain can kind of relax a little bit. And then it's almost like your subconscious is kind of clicking away and working on solutions. And if you just give it a moment to do its work. I don't know. Don't identify yourself with the size of your talent, your failure, or your successes. That if there's anything in my artistic life that I have had to struggle with the most, it's that. I don't want to say that folks in other fields other than the arts don't feel this, because as I said at the beginning, we're all creative. But those of us that are involved in painting or music or design, what we create, it's our babies. It really is. And if it's well received, if the anthem that I write is well received, I just feel like I'm God's gift to music. But if it's not received, if it doesn't really sell or sing, or people just aren't moved by it, then I just want to crawl into my cave and stay there, right? And that is so wrong, really on a spiritual level. And the lesson I've had to learn is, my identity is not in how well or how poorly I do music on any given day. My identity is in Christ, as someone that has been bought on the cross by the blood of Christ because he loves me so much. That's where my identity is, right? And if you fall into the mindset of relying too much on your, successes to keep your creative boat motoring, it's not always going to be that way, right? Because not everything you write is going to be a success, right? You have to find your identity in something greater, and what greater thing to find your identity in than Christ, right? What's popular today is forgotten tomorrow. There's 4 stages of a composer's life. You can really apply this to any field. But the first stage, as I'll use myself, is Brad who? Right? When he comes on the scene, Brad who? Then some publishers start liking you. You don't get as many rejection letters from Lloyd. And then you send your music to a publisher and it's, Brad baby. And then you're motoring along doing pretty well, but you're not the youngest one in the room anymore, and all of a sudden at the editorial meetings, the publisher say, get me a young Brad Nix. That's stage 3. And then you know what stage 4 is. It's back to the starting point. Brad who? It's just the way of it, right? So you just can't take it too seriously. The reward for being creative is in the journey itself and not any intended destination. Getting started again, don't worry. Once you write that first song, or you finish that first sculpture, or you write that first poem, do it again. Get started right away. Don't worry about repeating yourself. Don't think, oh, now I got to do something completely different. Otherwise, people think I'm repeating myself. No, repeat yourself over and over, over and over and over. Nothing's going to come out the same. A person can't ever step into the same river twice because the water's always flowing. Right? It's going to come out different. And you have to allow yourself the opportunity to repeat some things to gain mastery of your craft, okay? Last thing there was relationships, just an artistic, it helps being around other artists in the community. I put something else, before I wind this down, and I talked a little bit longer than I meant to. I'm so sorry. I want to have some time for questions, and here we are at the end of it. But I wanted to give you a couple of resources. And so, you see on the books, Walking on Water, I think is just one of the best resources that I've ever seen for people in creative endeavors. I have to warn you, I interpret theology conservatively. I think it's okay to say this at Baylor. I'm just going to come out and say I think that the only way to heaven is through Christ. If you don't go through Christ, you're not going. Madeline L'Engle's Walking on Water almost kind of borders a little bit toward a universalism that honestly I'm a little uncomfortable with. But her insights on how faith intersects with art are second to none. And so I would recommend Walking on Water. I was recommended that book by none other than Robert Sterling, who has read it many, many times. Bird by Bird, Some Instructions on Writing and Life by Anne Lamott. Now, the language is a little salty in that one. This is not a Christian book, although Anne Lamott is a Christian writer, but she's a Christian writer that doesn't mind using some pretty dicey language every now and then. But it is an incredible book for starting out. Where does Bird by Bird come from? It comes from a tale of her brother. When her brother was a little kid, he was having to write a project where he was cataloging all of these different birds into a report for biology or something, zoology, something. And he was overwhelmed. There's so many birds I've got to catalog. Maybe he'd waited too long, and now he's got to get this project done. And Anne Lamott's dad came along beside him and said, buddy, we're going to get this bird by bird. And you're going to write that piano arrangement note by note. You're going to write that poem or that book sentence by sentence until it's done. And that's kind of where this book is coming from. I've already mentioned Andrew Peterson, Adorning the Dark. It's kind of his take on creativity, and it's very much worth it. The War of Art, again, not a Christian book, but there are some things and there's some insights that are really thought-provoking. And then I've already mentioned Austin Kleon is Still Like an Artist. It's $12. It's a hilarious little book. It's fun. It's lighthearted. You can read it in 20 minutes. And then lastly, back to Andrew Peterson, I would recommend all of you to check out a website called The Rabbit Room, which is an online consortium that Andrew Peterson put together, and it's really a consortium all over under one umbrella of podcasts, of articles, of book reviews, of album reviews, just anything that you can think of about creativity, it is there. Where does the term The Rabbit Room come from? He is a big fan of C.S. Lewis and Tolkien and Chesterton and all those guys. And, you know, they met after they finished teaching their day at Oxford, right? They would meet in the back of a pub and they would discuss what issues they were grappling with and what books they were writing or reading. And the section of the pub that they met in was called The Rabbit Room. And so that's where this comes from. And much like those guys, it's just kind of a place where people come together to just talk about how art intersects with faith. Okay. Any questions? I know it's probably time to zip, but if anyone has a question, I'm happy to hang. Yeah.
When did you start taking music professionally?
When I was, there were two things that I wanted to be in my life, really. One was, after I snuck out and saw the movie Halloween as a little kid, I wanted to be Donald Pleasance, come around tracking serial killers in the trench coat. Dr. Loomis was the name. But after that, I decided, actually it was pretty quick, I'm being funny, but I didn't know what area of music I wanted to be in, but I knew I was going to be in music probably by the time I was 12. So, yeah, I knew it would be similar to music. Yeah. Anything else? Y'all have been a great crowd. I'm always nervous when I see the Baylor camera on me because I think, oh my gosh, I don't want to say anything that's going to be saved for posterity for better or worse. But anyway, thank y'all for coming.